Yeah, cool. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Rohit Goel is a professor and member of BICAR, the Bombay Institute for Critical Analysis and Research. And he's going to speak to us today about art, movement, and thought. So, Rohit, whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Oscar, for your introduction again to all of you. I'm very sorry about the video situation. I'm not that pretty, so it might be beneficial to you that the video is off. Really thanks a lot to the Bacon Estate and to King's College for occasioning this really unique conference, and really special thanks to Ben Ware for inviting me to share this analysis of Bacon's art and thought. I'm very sorry to not be present in London with you all, selfishly, because I've missed learning from the talks that preceded mine and the conversations you must have had around those talks, which I imagine were tremendous. And I'm really especially sorry to be missing Alanka's talk and the discussions you'll have with this evening. But so it goes. So basically, the talk is divided into two big parts. Just if I can give a sort of lay of the land of what I'm going to do. The first part is called not movement, okay? And in this first part on Bacon's work, I'm going to work through, Gilles Deleuze, as we all know, is very, very deservedly influential interpretation of Bacon's painting, not movement. And specifically on what this not movement means for Deleuze in his analysis of Bacon's artwork. Then I'm going to move to the second part, which I'm going to call not without movement. So Deleuze and Bacon, not movement. I'm going to go to the second part, not without movement, where I'll try and mobilize a bit of a psychoanalytic approach that departs, heavily indebted to Deleuze just introducing the very question of movement in Bacon's painting, but departs psychoanalytically from Deleuze on the question of movement and now thought in Bacon's painting. I'm going to be a bit anxious and keep checking in just to make sure you can hear me, and that given that there's no video, we're okay with sound and everything? Or?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm not going to speak longer than the scheduled 45 minutes. I know we're off to a bit of a late start, but if time permits, so after these first two movements, I'd like to conclude with a sort of staged discussion between Alain Badiou's very, very, very interesting and interestingly Deleuzean approach to movement and art that he develops in a piece from a great book called The Handbook of Anesthetics. And this piece is on dance, sort of the quintessential art of movement. Dance as a metaphor for thought. But let's see if we get there. I won't go beyond the time limit because there should be time for discussion. And maybe we can discuss Badiou in the discussion if I can get there. So if I were able to show slides, the first slide would be sort of a whipped head of Lucian Freud. It's a Bacon's painting from 1967 called The Study for the Head of Lucian Freud. So in Deleuze's book on Bacon's art, The Logic of Sensation, as we know, he begins by arguing, and it seems like a banal, sort of minor statement, but I'm going to take this as sort of the basis of this whole first part. Deleuze writes, what fascinates Bacon is not movement. What fascinates Bacon is not movement, but movement's effect on an immobile body, on a still body. Heads whipped by wind. This is what if you can imagine, the head of Lucian Freud from the 67 painting. Heads whipped by wind, deformed by an aspiration, but also all of these interior forces that climb through flesh. Bacon's art makes spasm visible. The entire body becomes plexus. Okay, so for Deleuze, first, this issue of movement, or rather not movement, right? What is this not movement? But again, he says what fascinates Bacon is not movement, but movement's effect on a still body, an immobile body. That's what the painting is. So what is this not movement? How, for Deleuze, does the absence of movement appear in Bacon's painting? For Deleuze, Bacon seems to be recording the absence of movement in his painting, in his work, in his artwork, by, this is a quote from Deleuze, making movement, or forces, he says, making movement visible through their movement's effect on the flesh that he's painting. So what Bacon is doing for Deleuze is painting the effects of movement, not movement itself. Right? Seeing the head, I'm sorry you can't see Lucien Freud, but if you have computers, if in Google or something, 1967, study for the head of Lucien Freud, seeing the head whipped by wind, the viewer perceives the effect of movement. The viewer doesn't see movement itself, it sees the traces or the record of movement in the painting, right? So movement is off screen. Right? So where, for Deleuze, does this movement that affects Bacon's painting, but is not itself present in the painting, come from? Right? Now, one, right, the sort of easy way to answer this would be that it comes from Bacon himself, the individual sort of genius, auteur or artiste who's working in a studio, moving his paintbrush, looking at photographs, right, etc. But no, Deleuze's argument is much more sophisticated, as we know. Right, it's the movement, off-screen movement, that is effectively being recorded on the canvas, is not coming from the person, Francis Bacon. Right? This movement that Deleuze sees as crucial, as necessary, as motivating of Bacon's painting, but a movement that nevertheless remains outside of the frame of the painting, off screen or off canvas, hence his claim not movement. Right? For Deleuze, that movement is not psychological or individual. It's not in the form or in or from the person Francis Bacon. This movement that's outside of the canvas, that's off screen, right, outside of the frame of the painting, is impersonal and virtual. Impersonal and virtual to this. So the movement is not in the painting itself, right? But it's an impersonal and virtual movement that is somehow outside of the painting, that the painting reminds us of, right? To find somewhere outside of the painting. So the movement is impersonal, it's virtual, and that's why for Deleuze, and that's exactly why, because movement is impersonal and virtual, that's exactly why for Deleuze, movement must remain outside of the frame. Right? Movement can only appear or be present in a painting, in Bacon's painting, as absence, as missing, right? Because if movement itself were to be included in the painting, painted, right, that painted image of movement would substantialize, psychologize, or individualize movement. It would kill the whole thing, the very impersonal or virtual movement that Deleuze is interested in. So but then what does this mean, right? Off-screen movements as impersonal and virtual. Where does this movement come from? If not from the body of Bacon or the genius of the painter, the psychologized individual painter, right? Where does it come from? Where does movement come from if it's not in the painting itself, right? If the painting is just the effects of movement, but not movement itself. For Deleuze, it seems that the whole point of Bacon's painting, right, is that the effects of movement, again, rather than movement itself, right, desubstantialize movement, right? That movement doesn't exist prior to the appearance of its effects in the painting. So now here's a different step, right? So it's Deleuze is almost saying that, okay, so there's no pre-existing thing. He's not substantializing movement, that it exists, and then the painting which registers the effects of movement, right, like the whipped head, which has been moved by the wind, right? It's the that's representing in some way some substantial thing called wind that moved the head, right, outside of the frame. Deleuze is saying something like movement doesn't exist prior to the appearance of its effects in Bacon's painting. He's saying that Bacon's painting incites movement in the viewer. Right? So when the viewer sees the effects of movement in Bacon's art, the viewer is driven to move, to do something. If that's clear, right? Okay, so this is I'm very respectful of Deleuze's interest in movement in Bacon. It's not an easy. It's a very sophisticated argument. But he's almost saying something like the painting as a record of the effects of movement. Right? Bacon's painting as the record of the effects of movement is not a representation of something that caused the movement, wind, let's say, right? But incites the viewer to think about how to move, right? So he's not substantializing something. But at the same time, I think that Deleuze's point, very sophisticated, still begs the question of how Bacon moves, or any painter moves her paintbrush, or any artist moves, right? To show the effects of movement in and on their artwork. So what moves the artist to show the effects of movement in their artwork, right? That done with insight. The viewer to move. Put differently, what for Deleuze drives Bacon? How does the artist begin to move? If we need the artist's artwork in order to begin to move, what artwork does the artist rely on to begin her artwork? Right? Who is the first artist? Is it God? Right? And conversely, why is this canvas immobile? Why is it some ready-made archive of the effects of a prior movement? Where does the stillness of this canvas come from, of the painting come from, that Deleuze is arguing receives, right, the effects of a movement that is off-screen, off-canvas? Is the canvas in Bacon's painting on the canvas really still? Is it immobile? I mean, especially, and there's a point that you'll hear a length on later, but especially after Malevik's Black Square, the artist, or we should think at least of sort of the contemporary artist or the painter as creating the very canvas on which he paints as he paints. Right? So what would it mean to think of the canvas as moving or emerging with the very work of art of painting? I mean, this is what Bacon says, of course, responding to David Sylvester, which, you know, as we all know, like sort of philosophical interest in Bacon, I think, really relies on his series of interviews over, I think, a quarter of a century, from the early 60s until the mid 80s with Sylvester. What he says to Sylvester on this issue of the movement of the canvas in conjunction, that the canvas moves in conjunction with the movement of the painter, of the artist, of the subject, right? He says, to me, the mystery of painting today is how can appearance be made? Right? So I know appearance can be illustrated, right? I know appearance can be illustrated. How can it be made? I know appearance can be photographed, but how can it be made? How can this thing be made so that you catch the mystery of appearance with the mystery of the making. So the mystery of appearance, the movement in the painting of the canvas is what is dialectically related to the movement of the painter, of the maker, right, of the subject. How can the thing, this painting, be made so that you catch the mystery of appearance with the mystery of its making, of the making? And here, yes, I want to suggest that we read Bacon's correlation of the mystery of appearance and the mystery of making, these conjoined mysteries, as movements, and sort of in response to Deleuze, to suggest that the painted appearance is not a still or immobile object that records an off-screen, impersonal movement or force, right? But that painting, Bacon's painting, is the work of that movement in itself. That Bacon, the painter's subjective movement, is objectified in the painting. So the painting dances, right? Bacon's painting is not, it's not some record or archive that his some sort of prior movements get registered onto or recorded onto, right? The record can only be created through, the painting itself, the act of painting itself. The mystery of the making, right, is absolutely conjoined to the mystery of the appearance. Here, again, if I were to, are we okay with sound? Again, any, yeah? If I were to move the slides, we'd go to slide, the second slide, which is Bacon's study for a head. It's sort of one of his screaming popes. So the mouth is agape, right? This is the 1952 study for a head. In some ways, it seems that Deleuze doesn't entirely know that he knows, right? The trouble with this parties extra parties approach to movement and stillness. This parties extra parties approach to movement and stillness, whereby movement is something external to the thing it moves, right? For Deleuze, such that the virtual, impersonal force of movement is outside of the still, immobile, painted figures, that the force of that movement outside of the frame affects. And in some ways, we know that Deleuze doesn't know that he knows this, because he ends up symptomatically, I would say, substantializing movement when reading precisely Bacon's screaming popes with their mouths agape. Right? Deleuze writes, "It is important to understand the affinity of the mouth and the interior of the mouth. It's important to understand the affinity of the mouth and its interior with meat. Meat, and to reach the, like a slab of meat, and to reach the point where the open mouth becomes nothing more than the section of a severed artery. The mouth, in this case, acquires a power of non-localization that turns all meat into a head without a face. Right? Body without organs, right? Or the vehicle, as we'll see. The head without a face is a vehicle to the body being released from some organomal structure. It's no longer a particular organ, the mouth, but it's a hole through which the entire body escapes and from which the flesh descends. And this is what Bacon calls the scream. Okay, so now for Deleuze, Bacon's painted canvas is not there seems to be a shift here. Bacon's painted canvas is not an immobile body or an archive stacks in the basement of a library, some final resting place of movement, right? Bacon's, here for Deleuze, his figurative mouths are not, he says, they're non-localizable, they're not localizable, they're not still, but they're still not quite movement itself. right? He says that the mouth is a severed artery, right? That's how he sees meat, right? The mouth is a severed artery. It's a visual passageway of movement. It's not movement itself. It's the facilitator of movement. It's the instrument or the vehicle of movement, the mouth, right? It's paint as a medium through which the impersonal forces of movement, which exist outside of the painting, enter the painting only so that they can escape the painting to do something else in the world, right? So the painting, the mouth as severed artery, as meat, is vehicular. It's a passageway. It is not the thing in and of itself. The art is not the thing in and of itself. It's not movement or thought in and of itself. Art, Bacon's art, its painting, is for Deleuze a means for some other beginning, right? That's prior to the art, these impersonal forces of movement. It's a means for some other beginning that's prior to the art, to the painting, to attain some other end that is beyond the painting, that's also outside of the painting, on the side of the future, right? So we have something like, in this moment of the text, of the logic of sensation, for Deleuze, it seems like we have something like, okay, now the painting is not completely immobile, it's more vehicular, right? But that what the purpose, the painting is an instrument for forces that are outside of it, right? The impersonal movement that exists outside of it, that begins and then passes through it so that it can end, right, in pure, continued impersonal movement. Right? For Deleuze, yes, here, right? The painting is just an instrument. It's a tool, a medium in this formulation. But if the painting is mere vehicle, if it's simply an instrument, a passageway for things before and after it, what are these things, right? I mean, I like this, again, what I like so much about Deleuze's work on Bacon is that he really gets me to think about movement, right? And so I want to figure out okay, so fine, if the movement is not in the painting itself, like it's outside of the frame, it's off canvas, off screen, what is it, right? I mean, in its impersonality, in its virtuality, what is this mysterious impersonal movement, this force that Deleuze rightly, I think, holds dear, but cannot be depicted? It cannot. And this is interesting. I was thinking about Sergei Eisenstein tried to like I sympathize with Deleuze here. Like Eisenstein tried to depict or like make a film about Marx's Capital. Like, how do you film like something like movement, like real abstraction, right? Like it's very difficult to do. And so I think Bacon does it really well. And but I think Deleuze is rightly struggling with whether that can be done or not. And I think he, as a result, puts the movement off screen rather than sees that Bacon is doing this very well, depicting movement in the painting itself. So what is this mysterious impersonal movement, this force that Deleuze holds dear but cannot be depicted, right? Rightfully holds dear but cannot be depicted. So much so that any effort to depict movement in a certain sense for Deleuze would be to kill it, right? If the painting, like the work right in front of us, I was going to say, which is Study for a Head, 1952, again, if it's just a passage, what is it that's taking this passage, and what becomes of it when it lands up outside of the work in, I guess, the virtual future? So what is this virtual past and what is this virtual future that's movement off screen, off canvas? Again, here I think Deleuze answers or tries to answer these questions. He knows that he has to answer these questions, and there's something symptomatic in his answers, right? Which is great, I think. And Eric Sandler was a really strong reader of Bacon's art, toward a sort of extraordinarily compelling but different argument. He writes about Deleuze's view of Bacon's work this way, and here I'd move to painting, Bacon's painting 1946, if I could have. Right? The pressure at issue in Bacon, the pressures of flight, of escape, of emergence in the open, are figured in such a way that meat represents only a transitory phase in a larger process of dissipation, whereby the figure finally merges with the material structure supporting it. Deleuze writes, the head meat, right, this head with a mouth agape that we can't see because I can't show slides, is a becoming animal of man. Now this is the substantialization of that impersonal force. It's the becoming animal of man for Deleuze. In this becoming animal of man, the entire body tends to escape from itself, and the figure tends to return to the material structure, which is animal, instinctual. Right? So he personalizes, substantializes precisely the force that he wants to, the movement that he wants to keep impersonal. Right? And I think part of that's because he doesn't locate movement. Well, the reason for that is that he doesn't locate movement, or he's not seeing movement in the painting itself, but as something virtually prior to the painting and after the painting. So here we have it, for Deleuze, the impersonal, mysterious force of movement that is off screen, off canvas, right, is actually not so impersonal and mysterious. It's vital. Movement for Deleuze is vital. It's instinctual movement. It's animal movement. And Bacon's art for Deleuze is a medium through which we're supposed to realize man's animality. And here I want to turn to the second thought, if I'm doing okay with time, where I see Bacon's art and his thought as he presented in his interviews with David Sylvester, as well as a bit of Freud, as disagreeing with Deleuze's position that movement is off canvas for Bacon. Sound has been okay. I'm audible. I'm going to part two, not without movement. Psychoanalysis and Bacon. Let me repeat Deleuze's statement about Bacon and movement in Bacon's art. Again, what fascinates Bacon is not movement, but its effect on an immobile body. Its effect, movement's effect on a still body. So Bacon is interested in the effects for Deleuze of movement on stillness, the still body, not movement itself. The Lacanian philosopher, Joan Kovtchek, has written really brilliantly about, this is a crazy word, I know, about leitities or understatement, right? And this argumentative form of leitities, understatement and argumentation, I want to sort of quickly mobilize to differentiate Bacon in his work from his painting, from Deleuze's reading of it, and put movement in Bacon's painting itself, rather than keep it outside of it. Crazily, I know, it's always like I want to suggest that Bacon's art is actually an understated art. So Kovtchek challenging the received differentiation between anxiety and fear, right? Where typically, so fear is thought to be transitive, like fear has an object, one is fearful of some, like a thing, like a ghost or a black cat, or whatever, right? There's a thing, fear is transitive, it's with an object. Anxiety is, in sort of, typically, seen as intransitive, as without an object. Like one is just anxious, not about something like a ghost or a black cat or whatever, but you're just, one is, when one's anxious, one is simply anxious, like full stop. Here, Kovtchek, like on Lacan, she like her reading of Lacan is brilliant because and this notion of lightities or understatement, right? She argues that anxiety is not, it's not this either or. It's not like with or without object, right? It's not either with an object. It's on either with object feel, nor is it though, as we typically see, or one might typically see anxiety, who's sort of versed a bit in Freud and Lacan, as without an object, right? Joan reads Lacan as I think quite productively as saying that anxiety is not without object, right? Not without an object. She explains it very well. She says, like, through the rhetorical structure of lightities, one expresses an affirmation by negating its contrary. If someone were to say to you, for example, I am not unhappy with the way things turned out, you would be able to discern an affirmation of the following sorts. It would be an understatement to say I am happy. In fact, I am ecstatic. So if one were to say, I'm not unhappy with the way things turned out, this notion of understatement or lightities would read this as, it would be an understatement, negating, I am not unhappy, negating the contrary of the affirmation, happiness, right? Actually, something that it would be an understatement to say I'm happy, I am in fact ecstatic. She goes on, likewise, when Lacan asserts that anxiety is not without object, right? He tells us, in effect, that it would be an understatement to say that anxiety has an object. It would be an understatement to say that anxiety has an object. For anxiety is precipitated by an encounter with an object of a level of certainty. And anxiety is precipitated by an encounter with an object of a level of certainty superior to that of any object of fact, right? Any actual object, superior to any actual object. And this is what I think Bacon means by the brutality of fact. He's not just talking about facts. It's the superiority of the not without object, the lightities, right? That is superior to any object of fact, to any actual object. And so this is so despite the fact that the object affirmed by this figure of speech, lightities, is nowhere present in the statement, but is rather a surplus of signification beyond what is explicitly said. It's not stated by being understated in and by the negation, right? That was hard. It was a bit dense. Sorry about that. But this notion that the affirmation through negation of the contrary of that affirmation is precisely what I see to be movement in Bacon's work. And what he means by, famously his phrase, the brutality of fact. Bacon's painting is not still figures. So on this, Bacon's painting is not still figures affected by movement. They're not still figures, immobile bodies, affected by some off-screen or off-canvas movement. But I want to say that they're figures that are not without movement. Or to anticipate Alenka's, your final speaker today, her formulation, Bacon's painting is without movement, right? It's not either absent of movement, not movement, Deleuze, nor is it only movement. It's without movement. It's not without movement, right? If you could again look at the image of the study for the head of Lucian Freud, you see this movement and stillness in the painting itself. It's clearly on canvas, on screen, right? The movement's brutality, right, is not coming from somewhere outside the painting. This figure, Lucian Freud, is the head of Lucian Freud, is moving, it's shuddering in the painting at the very same time that it's obviously still, it's a painting, right? To push this argument further, Bacon shows us that we can only see movement in stillness and vice versa. We can only see stillness and movement. It's impossible it's impossible to see movement as outside of stillness, some prior after fact of stillness, and vice versa. It's impossible to see stillness as prior or after movement. Right? This is the beauty of the painting, and this is what he captures. Francis Bacon captures in his work. He executes, to quote Beckett, this diabolically difficult task of trapping the real. And what he means, I think, by the real is movement and stillness, stillness and movement. The objet art is a dancer of sorts, right? On his still and moving canvas. Here's what Bacon says to Sylvester when pressed to really differentiate his painting, right? Which Bacon, of course, we know insists is non-illustrational. When Sylvester presses him to differentiate his painting, his non-illustrational painting from representational or documentary illustrational artwork, that style that, I think completely plagues the contemporary art world today. Right? Bacon says, I think the difference from those who directly record, say maybe like just through the camera, or it's not just the camera, it could be, just representational sort of paintings of suffering, etc., like a protest. Bacon says, I think the difference from those who directly record is that for me as an artist, you have to, in a sense, set a trap by which you hope to trap living fact alive. Living fact alive. How well can the artist set that trap? Where and at what moment, and this is a crucial word, where and what moment will it click, right? That click, right, is the moment of movement in the stillness of the artwork where you've made good art. Right? You haven't documented, you've created. And so I think this, Bacon's questions that he puts back to Sylvester are really important. They're challenging questions for artists as well as for philosophers. This movement, this work of thought, again, for Bacon, is not outside the painting or the text. It's not some instinctual animal form that our art and thought and text and talks should remind us to get back to. Right? I think Bacon's painting shows us that our art and thought should move. It should itself create. Right? That we do not paint and think to remind us that we've always already been created as animals, right? Or we create ourselves. We create ourselves by painting and thinking. Let's go back to the Bacon statement, though, on the living fact alive, trapping the living fact alive. Where and at what moment does this movement of thought, this creation, this trapping of living fact alive, where does it click, as he puts it? Bacon is saying that what he traps alive in his painting is not something that, again, pre-exists or exists outside of the frame of the artwork, but that what he traps is what he is creating in his painting. Right? That's why he says the fact is living, that it's alive, because it is created and not merely represented. Right? The word doesn't murder the thing for Bacon. Like, art is not a representation of the thing that's outside of the art. Here's what he says to Sylvester again, right? One constructs an artificial structure. This mystery of painting, or of the making, one that's the method. One constructs an artificial structure by which one can trap the reality of the subject matter that one has started from, the topic or whatever they want to start. One can trap the reality of the topic or the subject matter that one has started from. The subject matter is the bait. The topic, the topical, the phenomenological, what you see is the bait to get to the created reality, to the brutality of fact. Sylvester asks, and what is that reality that remains then? Right? What is that residue? How does it relate to the subject matter that you began? Bacon replies, it doesn't necessarily relate to it. So that brutality of fact, that real, that click, right, that movement, doesn't necessarily relate to the subject matter that he's starting with. But he says, you will have created a realism equivalent to the subject matter, but that which will be what is left in its place, in the place of that subject matter. That realism that you're creating is left in the place of the subject matter that you start with. Look at this movement, right? You have to start from somewhere, and you start from the subject matter, which gradually, if the thing works well at all, withers away and leaves this residue, which we will call reality, real, and which perhaps has something tenuously to do with what one started with, but very often has very little to do with it. This is the click in painting for Bacon. I'm sorry, I know I'm coming to my time. I'm almost done. I don't leave that you aside, so that we can have a couple of questions, I hope. This is the click in painting for Bacon, right? It's a creative hunting or trapping of movement and stillness, contingency in necessity. And here, by way of sort of summing up, like I just want, like it's amazing, like it resonates a lot with me. Like one of Freud's case studies, I think fleshes out an analysis on this notion of the click, of the trap that Bacon is talking about, that I think he's doing with regards to movement and stillness and movement in his painting, brilliantly. And a case study, a summation of a case study that Kopchak, I think, just puts, like, she does it very economically as usual with words, so I'll just read it out. So when a young woman patient of Freud makes the delusional accusation that her lover has planted hidden witnesses to photograph their lovemaking in order to disgrace her and force her to resign her position in society, her lover questions her closely and Freudian slip. Freud questions her closely and discovers that the onset of the delusion coincided with a specific accident, contingency accident. This patient, she was lying half dressed beside her lover, and the woman, the patient, suddenly heard a noise like a click or a beat. It was this click which the woman later interpreted outside of the frame of those scene of love making. It was this click which the woman later interpreted as that of the camera photographing her and her lover. From the beginning, Freud does not doubt that there was a click or a beat, but he does protest that he cannot believe that had that some absolute continuous unlucky noise, right, which the woman's lover identifies as coming from a clock on the far side of the room. Right? Freud, he doesn't deny that there was a click or a beat, but he protests. He says, I can't believe that had that noise not accidentally from some clock, right, occurred, that her delusion would not have formed. Right? This anxiety, this suspicion, right, that she's being spied on, right, or that her lover is spying on her in the act of making love. After further speculation, Freud summons up the courage to go further in his analysis of this ostensibly real accident. He risks the following hypothesis. I do not believe that the clock ever ticked or that there was a noise to be heard at all. The woman's situation, that is her lying half naked on the sofa with her lover, justified a sensation of a knock or beat in her clitoris. And it was this that she subsequently projected as a perception on an external object. Now, this is not Freud being dirty and whatnot, saying that the noise, the disruption, right, the click, right, is internal to the painting, to the body, right? And what we tend to do is we project it onto something that is not us, this disruption that allows us to move in the first place, to do something in the first place, to paint, to think. So we see that for Freud, and I'm stopping now, that the click, the noise is not unlucky. It's not some external off-screen, off-campus accident that we record in immobile painting or analytical sessions. Right? The aim of painting for Bacon, of analysis for Freud, is to relocate the movement, the sound, the click, the contingency in the painting, in the body itself, right? The necessity of relocating this contingency in the body, in painting, in art itself. Like Freud's half-naked patient, Deleuze again projects that click onto something outside of the frame of creation, onto some pre-existing man as a vital, instinctual animal. And I think this is the mistake that Bacon and Freud, like psychoanalysis, corrects. Maybe I'll just stop there because it's 8:50. I'm sorry that there were tech issues. But thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Rohit. That was really interesting. We have time for a couple of questions, if there are any in the room. Mike's just next to Lenka over there. If not, Rohit, maybe you could elaborate on your point on Badiou you were going to make towards the end. Let's see if that the last few minutes we left.
Sure. Okay. I'm sorry. I like I haven't the talk doesn't inspire questions, but yeah. I mean the bit on Badiou. So Badiou, it's very interesting because Badiou. What I wanted to talk about with regards to Badiou is this really wonderful piece that he wrote called "Dance as a Metaphor for Thought." Right, and I've been really interested in thinking about dance and movement with regards to Lacan's formulation of the object small a, right? That there's a movement, there's a dance between the absence and presence that is the object small a, that is the surfeit, right? The surplus. Right, that can't it's very hard to visualize, this. And what I was going to do is, I think Badiou is really great because he wants to take dance seriously. He really wants to take dance seriously. But what he'll say is that dance is sort of a preparatory. Almost, it's weird because otherwise Badiou and Deleuze seem to be a bit apart. But he, I think, sort of agrees with Deleuze that dance is like a preparation for thought, right? Dance is not the event itself. It's before the event. It clears, right? The movement of dance clears the space for theater, theater, thought. And so I was good. It would take me about 20 minutes, I imagine, to go through what I have written on Badiou and dance and movement. But it's interestingly close to Deleuze, I think, in a very productive way, but also in a way that is limited. That I think Bacon chose the limitation of this understanding of movement as before thinking or the work of art. Like dance is almost like a pre-art form for Badiou, and he says this is why it's brilliant. We need dance so that we can have theater, right? But we need dance so that we can think, so that we can have theater. It's not that there's thought in dance itself. And so there's a sort of homology between, I think, this putting movement outside of the frame or off screen or off canvas between Badiou and Deleuze, and specifically on this issue of dance. And I was going to go through Anna Teresa de Keersmacher, like a bit of her work with Steve Reich on dance and sound. But yeah, I don't think I will have time to do that. I know.
Yeah, no, that's great, Rohit. Thank you. We actually have one question now. The last few minutes to talk from Colette.
Hi, Rohit. Thank you very much for the talk. It was really interesting. Sort of reviving the podcast format. So I was sort of thinking about. It's great. I sort of had, I think, what Sasha would call like a banal question, which is sort of I guess a broader question about where we're locating movement. So in the sort of, there's kind of this long-standing, debate in the kind of analytic philosophical literature lately about kind of emotion and movement and where we locate it in the aesthetic experience. So, locating it in the painting, which obviously throws up kind of some problems because obviously the painting is static. It seems meaningful to talk about, as you've kind of shown through your analysis, the sort of dynamism, the kinesthetics of a Bacon in particular. But it seems also confusing to talk about it because we're working with an object that's fundamentally not moving. The experience, there's kind of not necessarily an experience of energy in the viewer, and so I guess a sort of solution to that sort of puzzle that I've often favored is the idea of metaphor and the kind of idea of metaphorical movement, where we're sort of reading it into the object, but it's not necessarily kind of a property in the kind of aesthetic property proper sense that we would use it in. It's kind of this metaphorical sense of movement, and I think that also kind of ties into the sort of psychoanalytic point you were making towards the end, because obviously a lot of the kind of movements we make in kind of, well, a lot of the movements that interpreters detect and analysts detect in our kind of psychology are often themselves quite metaphorical. And so, yeah, I just wondered if you'd had any thoughts about this sort of thing, and if you saw any kind of role for metaphor in this sort of explanation of energy and movement in Bacon's work.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Like you've anticipated in some ways exactly what I would have talked about with regards to that you on dance as a metaphor for thought. And so this, I think, I'm so glad that you so clearly brought this up. I think metaphor is the problem with regards to like thinking about movement or affect, maybe we could call it, right? Here I agree with Freud. Like affects can't metaphor is repression, right? Like, so metaphor is substitution. That's the point of repression, right? What you metaphorize, right, is being repressed, right? What you don't say, what you say, what's being repressed is what you don't say and what you say, right? So that's a metaphor, right? It's substitution. So it's precisely this notion of movement as representational, right? As a metaphor, right? That I want to get away from. Affect, or I think Freud is very right here, that ideas are repressed, right? Ideas are the stuff of metaphor. Affect is not repressed. It's not metaphor. It's metonymy. Affect is displaced, right? Affect moves. Right, so movement is really on the surface. I think if, like, again, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to show slides. It would have, but we can see Bacon's work, or what I was going to show. I can send you also the bits on Badiou, but there is movement in stillness, right? There just is. It's not metaphorical. It's not like stillness is substituting for the movement that occurred before the stillness, right? You can see in his work, like, this is, I think, the promise of his work. You can see in his work that these obviously still painted, framed, right, works are moving, and not moving in, like, you can literally, not moving in, like literally moving, but you could see displacements across the paintings. Like, your eyes are moving, right, with the painting, right? And so getting away, I think precisely getting away from thinking about movement as metaphor or dance as metaphor, right, for then thought, or as dance or movement as preparatory, right, for the stillness of thought, is what I think is what Bacon asks us to do. But I mean, you put the question very, very precisely. I'm not doing tremendous justice to answering you, but
no, it's super helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have time for follow-up?
I think we have to leave it there.
Okay.
Actually,
No worries.
unfortunately, yeah. Thank you so much, Rohit, again for that. Apologies for the
Thank you.
technical issues.
Yeah, thank you very much, Oscar. Thank you, everyone, and my tremendous apologies for not being able to even virtually be with you.
No, no problem. That happens. Thank you so much.
Okay. Enjoy the talk. I'm feeling FOMO. From this meeting. Good day.
Okay, cool. So we have
Bye-bye.
a half an hour break now. Then we're back here for 5 o'clock for our final talk of the day.